Welcome to the Spark Hot Seat series, where we dig into the real, raw journey of founding and scaling a business with a co founder. Get ready for the good, the bad, and the brutally honest truth about business relationships. Hi, everyone. We have a fantastic guest today at Spark Hot Seat. It's Vlada Lotkina, a SaaS founder, growth expert, and startup mentor. She founded ClassTag, school family communication platform with over 5 million users. That's impressive. And successfully led from idea to exit. With an MBA from Wharton and experience at Fortune 500 companies, Vlada now mentors entrepreneurs at elevatorlab.com. Please go and find it, helping them turn ideas into successful businesses. Originally from Ukraine, I love Ukraine. I have so many friends from Ukraine. We'll talk a little bit more about that. She's a strong advocate for female founders and immigrant entrepreneurs, and has been featured in Forbes and Huffington Post and more. So, Blair, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to hear a little bit about your story about how you even landed in Miami and entrepreneurship.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here and joy to be with a female founder.
Yeah.
And support your trajectory, and I love your ambition as well. But how I landed in Miami, not directly in Miami. I landed in Philly when I just came here to do MBA from Ukraine, which was quite a change.
I bet.
And then I spent most of my time in the US in New York, and like many New Yorkers moved to Miami a couple of years ago.
That's a trend I see. I also lived in New York for 10 years and I moved right before COVID, a month before COVID, where everyone thought I was crazy to move here. And then by May, everyone thought I was a genius. That's how it happens in entrepreneurship too, I think. People tag you as a crazy person, and then when your idea actually blows up, people are like, you're a genius. How do you come up with that idea?
Exactly.
Let's talk about your first idea, your entrepreneurship. How did that come up?
Back in Ukraine, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and in fact, I think from age of 18 or so, I started working alongside my dad, who's an entrepreneur. And so I knew that at some point in the future, I'll go back to entrepreneurship. But in the meantime, I wanted to go and explore the world, and I felt that going to US, getting MBA, and learning what I thought the proper way of doing business, which was big corporations.
Yes.
Was sort of a really exciting stepping stone to that. And so that lasted way longer than I thought. It took me probably on a 12 years career journey. But I started itching to become an entrepreneur. And I started looking for problems that I was excited to solve. And the problem that I ended up solving was one of them. When my daughter started school in New York City, I saw how outdated and fragmented parent communication was, and lost somewhere between the flyers in the backpack and sign-up sheets on the door. I realized that that's a problem that's near and dear to my heart. I wanted parents to be partners in their kids' education, and I thought the technology can help them achieve that.
Definitely. And this was before COVID, right?
Yes, and that was actually, that reminded me, because when the company was already big and I was growing it for a number of years, folks said, oh my God, what a brilliant idea during COVID. I was like, yeah, but I started in 2015.
I knew about this before COVID. It was a problem. But I'm assuming COVID also blew up. It blew up more? Or was it really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And so during COVID, yes, it blew up. Initially, we had with zero even marketing dollars, we had maybe 2,000, 3,000 new teachers signing up, and every teacher brings in, let's say, 30 parents, right? And so they started communicating and using it in completely new ways to track attendance because of the online meetings, to create these check-ins, how the kids are feeling, and sharing some fun moments from home. So it started being used as a
So basically you're adding features on the go.
Oh my
God. You were like, because I feel like that's another thing I saw. At work or schools, I think a lot of people were eager to go online because that was the only way to communicate at that point.
Correct.
So all these problems or opportunities, how we want to see them, started flourishing.
and you needed to act very, very fast with your
Exactly,
team.
yeah. So we were working pretty much around the clock. I think we were lucky in a way that we've always been a remote company. So from day one, we've always been online. In fact, my corporate career largely was online as well. So I felt like I was very prepared for those changes. But so there wasn't much change in the team itself, but there was certainly a huge influx of new work, which was exciting because we felt so needed like never before, right? And that was special time for
I'm
sure.
curious because you say your team was everywhere. Your co-founders were also everywhere?
My co-founder was in New York as well, but the rest of the team, we had a development team in Ukraine, we had a support team in Philippines, and we had folks scattered all over Europe and US.
Let's talk about your co-founder for a minute.
Yeah.
Did you start the company with that person, or did he come later in the process? And how do you meet him?
I'm not technical. My background is sort of strategy and everything to do with business, but now I still can't write a line of code. And so I knew that perhaps to start a successful tech company, I need a technical co-founder. And so I started going to meetups. I started reaching out to various people who had anything tech related on their LinkedIn profile and trying to meet them, and maybe it's them or maybe it's someone they know. I was also talking to everyone I could possibly, who would listen or not listen, or I can convince to listen about
knocking every door possible.
Knocking every door, and I felt that sort of serendipity would happen, but actually wasn't happening for a while. I would say maybe 5-6 months. I was finding people, but I felt that in order for someone to be my co-founder, I have to be so impressed by that person. I really wanted someone not only technical, who can physically deliver on what I wanted, but someone who I would say, wow, you inspire me, and together we can build an amazing company. And that was a pretty high bar. And he came out of nowhere. He came out actually from my daughter's preschool. So his son and my daughter were classmates in a preschool. And as part of my customer discovery, I sent a survey to the preschool parents to ask them about their communication experience and whatnot. And then he filled out a survey and emailed me back, maybe I can be helpful.
I love that. But it's so funny because I think even though you tried everywhere for 6 months to find someone.
He was right there.
He came out of the most unexpected place.
Right, exactly.
But what I love is because you put yourself out there. Because you were doing basically market research with the people that you knew, because you had them on hand. And through market research, you found a user that potentially was a co-founder.
Exactly.
And I already knew and loved your product, which is another way to do it. That's one thing that we're very passionate about in Spark Founders, because it's not about just the complementing skills that is hard to find, because if in your network you don't have those people, as you were saying, I'm a business strategy person. And then I really want someone in technology. You just moved from Ukraine, even though you have years. It's like, where do I go?
I didn't know any people in that skill set, for sure.
So you want to really go and expand your network. And I love that that's how you find out. Let's talk about one hot topic that I would say people will very curious. When did you guys talk about equity?
Our conversation was about equity was the moment I realized I really wanted to have him as my co-founder, because I think unfortunately the reality is that a lot of people want to get before they give, and that just doesn't make for a great partnership from the get-go. And he was a special kind of person who actually didn't want to have that conversation, because for him the joy of creation was way more important than sort of what percentage that turns into. And I think that really closely aligns with my values in a way that I do want to believe in the best in people, and I want to really show what I'm worth before I tell you I want half of your company. So I felt that even though we didn't know each other personally, that really illustrated to me what kind of person he is. He was actually incredibly successful, brought his first company public on NASDAQ, and then
That's amazing.
he had a number of other startup experiences, but obviously, startups are much more about times that you are forced to learn as opposed to win, right? If you look at success rate, the facts are pretty undeniable. But so he was not someone who was pushing for equity. We basically talked about the investment, monetary investment, who is doing what, and then how each of us is contributing their time. And so then that helped us define our equity split.
Did you have also a trial offer, like a peer that you were like, let's work together and see how we feel about each other? And then maybe like in 2 to 3 months, maybe we can actually start thinking about, okay, now that we know, this is how we're going to separate the pie.
Yeah, I think that it actually happened organically that way because he was not pushing for equity.
He wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, he wasn't. In fact, I had to convince him to take
That's
that.
amazing.
I was like, take the equity. It's like, why did you print it? Because this paper is more expensive than your company at this point in time. That only someone who's had a lot of experience with startups can say. In fact, I hired because I think one of the important pieces of advice for non-technical founders is actually to keep moving forward, right? I think a lot of folks, or technical or not, right, just to continue, because everyone wants to be part of a train that's moving and moving fast. Nobody wants to be part of a train that just stopped and waiting for some magic to happen, right? And I think
nothing is going to happen if you don't make it happen.
Right, exactly.
I would say that's the biggest slogan of entrepreneurship. It's like you have to do it yourself.
Right.
But if you have someone that helps you out, that goes faster.
Right.
That train moves faster.
Right. And so in my experience, I actually hired an outsourcing firm initially to develop my MVP. As the luck headed, actually, they went bust and never delivered the MVP.
Oh my God, really?
And so then he stepped in and he said, well, I guess I'm going to build it.
Wow.
And so he did.
That's amazing. So it's funny because a lot of people say, go to the people that are the experts. And then you go to an agency or you go to a company thinking that they're going to deliver something extremely professional. It can be. It can be. It could be a little bit more expensive sometimes, first. And then second, that these big agencies potentially might give you the junior interns to give you your MVP, or they don't give you that importance because you are not their biggest client, because you're just starting. So sometimes it's a tricky thing. So that's why I love so much when you do find that person that really wants to help you. A co-founder is much more than an employee. Because I feel like a lot of people are like, what's the difference between employee number one and a co-founder? The co-founder is with you for everything.
Right.
Whereas an employee, you tell them kind of the responsibilities you want them to have and how they want to help. And then maybe they could become a co-founder if they're employee number one, number two, and they're very invested in it. But a co-founder really is there for the thick and thin, like everything goes through that person. How did you divide these responsibilities internally?
I would say over the course of company's life, there are certainly new things that came up that we've allocated, right? And I think from the get-go, because he was actually the CEO of the company he brought public, I think every time he tried to be CTO, folks pulled him up and said, hey, I need help fundraising, I need help with that. And he was very explicit that's not something he wanted. And that worked perfectly for me because I said,
you wanted to do
I wanted to do it. I wanted to take on everything business related. And he said he will not intervene. And I had no clue how to build the tech, and he knew all about it. So it was like really good match. And over time there were things like HR and legal, for example, that he took on. Something like customer support, because it was so close to the product and to actually, I view customer support as actually the best marketing tool. So that's something I've kept with me. So there were things that we were allocating along the way. But yeah, fundamentally, as CEO, my job was to not run out of money, which is the number one thing that you need to do.
First, congratulations on doing an exit of this amazing, company that you guys created. But I'm curious to see if you have a different point of view when you exit, or was it really also kind of very organic? You said, okay, this is an opportunity, let's take it like this. I'm curious to see what was the conversation when you decided to exit.
I think most exits are at least months or sometimes years in the making, right? And there's a series of things that lead to them. It's not very easy to sell your company, but
that's why I said congratulations, because I know people think it's easy. It's like someone else could be like, I'll give you, $1 million for your company. No, it's not really like that, and you have to prepare, and they have to, really look into everything you're doing.
Yeah, there's an army of people that come and check up on every aspect of everything you've ever done. For us, actually, I think every time you fundraise as a founder, you have to ask yourself a question about other options, right? Because every time you fundraise, especially if you're in an industry like education, which doesn't have a lot of huge public companies or other big acquirers who can pay crazy amounts and multiples to have a successful exit, you have to ask yourself, should I raise, or should I sell, or should I partner? What is my optionality? Because every time you raise, you have fewer potential acquirers. And so I would say probably about 2 years before we ended up selling, we started asking ourselves that question more actively, and in fact went through a failed M&A, and I actually quite publicly talk about it. I don't name the fund, but I think that's something that to me is very important that founders know, that most M&A transactions actually don't end up happening, and I was just really not aware of that as a founder.
I'm curious to see maybe like the top 3 things that you learned from that failure. What would you like to communicate to other founders of the experience of that failure M&A?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, whether it's failed M&A or just fundraising process or anything that takes you away from running a business, you have to ensure that your business not only continues to perform, but performs better than your plans. And so that, I think, is really an art and a science, and who you have in place in your team to make it happen, the timing of things, right? For example, if you know that your business is very seasonal and your Q1 is your toughest quarter, well, maybe don't try to fundraise in the beginning of Q1, because they will start asking you how you are doing, and for some strange reason, which has absolutely no logic, but they will always ask you, how did you do last month? And they will make that last month matter than the rest of 5-year history. It's fairly emotional and irrational, but that's the way it is. And then, of course, if that month was worse than what you projected, then they will come back to cut you on your valuation, or they will use it as a way to back out of the deal, or whatever, leverage, they gain leverage from that.
So basically the present is more than anything, right? So like if you think
have
about...
to perform better than you've ever had, right? So you have to, I think a lot of founders get consumed by sales process or fundraising process, and that's fine, but then they need to make sure that their whole team has their eyes on the prize and they continue to run a successful business better than they've ever had.
It's funny you mentioned this, because I worked in corporate a lot of my life, and it's similar, because if they go public, every quarter it has to be 30% better than the last quarter. If they don't do that, they need to fire people, they need to reduce costs, something needs to change, because they cannot show that they haven't grown whatever they told their investors and the public that they were going to actually grow. So it's not something only for startups, software corporations, but we need to learn, because the people that are potentially acquiring you, that's how they operate. And that's how they're thinking about this startup. They're going to think about it as a future corporation. So they're treating it like that.
Right, exactly. So I think that was one big lesson. So never get distracted from actually running a great business and building a great business, because at the end of the day, whether the transaction happens or not, you're so much better off with a good business at the end of it.
Let's just not forget about your business, basically, when you're trying to sell it.
And the other thing is, perhaps goes back to your co-founder, right? Because that moment, and unfortunately the way they pulled out was also the day that the war started in Ukraine, and my parents and a lot of my developers were obviously threatened for their lives, and it was a week before we were supposed to close. So we already basically was final stages. Everyone knew, the team knew, so it was really bad.
I'm sorry. I feel like that sometimes everything comes at the same time, the good and the bad, right? Like sometimes just a wave of bad news.
It was all bad in the moment, but now I'm actually feeling great.
When these negative things that feel like the end of the world for you in that day maybe saved you at the end because they had a better plan for you at the end of the way.
For sure.
So, I'm happy that you had a final exit that was actually very successful. And that happened a year later? What was the
I would say it was about, I think a year and a few months later.
And what did you learn in this? What did you do differently this time, I would say? Apart from preparing for those months.
I said up front, I'm not going to give any access to my team because my team is too busy building the business. You only get me until we sign, and then I'll gladly introduce you to other
You need
people.
to put your own boundaries. I think that's extremely important because even though you're a smaller company, but they want to buy you. So you are in the position of power. So you should tell them how you're going to manage it. And I think sometimes we forget that power that we have.
Absolutely, and I think that was my second learning is you cannot, the moment you sign this letter of intent, which is sort of more procedural, right, in that process, but you sort of give up some of your power, but not all of it, right? It's at the end of the day, it's still your decision whether you sell it or not. You have to ask tough questions. You have to ask, what is the strategy? How do we fit into your overall agenda, right? What is going to be organizationally done, right? Like, I think in the first experience, I was much more, just waiting for it to happen and just sitting there counting. But in the second experience, I think I was just much more ready to be the partner as opposed to just being on the receiving end.
And be in control.
Correct.
I love that. Empower women.
Power women, yeah.
And when you mentor startups, do you take into consideration that founding team? And how do you think that reflects in that company?
I love mentoring founders, and it's sort of, I fell into it not really by design, but founders just started coming to me after I shared that I had an exit, and then I felt I was repeating the same things over and over, so I recorded a course and now have a one-on-one mentorship as well as a small group mentorship. A lot of founders are education, ed tech, but some broader SaaS as well. And it's very therapeutic for me because I had a chance to go back and reflect on a lot of lessons I learned, on a lot of playbooks that worked, playbooks I tried, and just hard-learned lessons along the way, and effectively just put a lot of, I think, practical things because it's still in my muscle memory since it's so recent, but also I think a lot of wisdom, not to toot my own horn, but a lot of things that are just really raw and real as opposed to just a glorified, making millions type of founder journey, which is hopefully that happens eventually, but there are a lot of things to fill in. But when I mentor founders, I encourage them to join with their co-founder as well, because I think it's so great to have that shared set of sort of playbooks and priorities and things like that. And so I actually now have a number of teams that are effectively double or triple because they all wanted to be part of the program. And so I actually don't even charge extra because I think it's so important that they have that bonding experience through the program. But I also work with founders when they're looking for their early team, right? So effectively, my focus.
You help them also to kind of figure out how to put that team together.
I do in some ways. If I have relevant introductions, I make them, but more so just from a more of a framework perspective of how to think about that process.
That conversation, I think. That's one thing that we connected very well when we started talking, because I feel like those talk conversations need to happen from the beginning, because people feel like they have to leave them at a complicated situation. But they have to go through the scenarios before they happen. Otherwise, they wouldn't know how to react to them.
Right, for sure.
So I love that you kind of saw that already, and you're teaching that to your founders. How important do you think is for startups now to have co-founders, versus having a solo entrepreneur, for example?
I think it's a personal choice. I do believe that founders who have co-founder, one or two, they end up being, on average, more successful than those who are solo entrepreneurs. And I think some of the accelerator program like Y Combinator, I think they've seen it in their data. I don't have enough data set in my experience, but I think it makes sense. And I think, in fact, one of the lessons I learned along my journey is that first is with who and then what. And so now, as I was reflecting about, I do think I'm crazy enough to go in the next startup cycle.
Very excited.
And I think I was just meeting interesting people and seeing, maybe I have idea, maybe they have idea, maybe they come from an industry that I think is attractive in kind of following the money perspective, just letting serendipity happen. So I think that my realization was I want a co-founder. I wanted a co-founder that is still inspiring. We have values alignment, complementary skill set, and then we can figure out what we're going to build, even if we don't know what we're building yet.
I think this is something that, when Spark founders, it's not the solution for you to start a company tomorrow, but it's the spark. That's why I love the name Spark. It's because it's sparking connections that potentially will give you an idea, or will tell you, I love your idea, but maybe if I introduce you to someone else to do something else. I love your story. Thank you so much for joining. I would love for you to give us just 3 tips you think co-founders and founders want to hear about maybe their next startup, what to take into consideration.
Well, I think number one is, and going back to founder market fit, right? I think there is a lot of discussion about product market fit, but not enough about founder market fit, right? I think folks get excited about big trends, and we're in Miami, so everyone was building crypto, Web3. Now everyone changed up into AI, right? And that might be a solution, but if you're clueless and you've never spent time in it, perhaps you have to think again or find someone who is an expert in that area. So I don't believe in sort of just dreaming up some things when none of you is an expert in a field or hasn't personally experienced the problem that you're looking to solve. Because I think early stage requires so much conviction and so much resilience to persevere through a ton of rejection, and the only way you can do it, if you're a sane person, is if you have this deep-rooted belief, right? That comes from personal experience or experience of your co-founder, right? So I think that founder fit is key, founder market fit. 2 is biggest mistake I see founders make is they don't do enough validation. Customers and prospects are voting with their dollars, voting with their commitment, as opposed to just saying, hey, this is a great idea, right? They go interview a bunch of people and they say, fantastic, I love that.
Most people are going to tell you, this is amazing.
Right, and I said, what else is going to tell you? It doesn't cost them anything, right? And people generally want to be nice if, it doesn't cost them anything. So that was, that's the second thing I would say, just do validation. One of the co-founders should be constantly talking to people, and the other one should be building. And that's perhaps advice number 3 is there are only 2 things that you should do as an early team is talk to people who will pay and build. That's it.
Thank you so much, Vlada.